And just let me know when you think the time is right. Here we go. We're up to 9.
My neighbor.
What do you think? Should we start or wait a little longer?
We, what time? I'm 7:03. I think you could start.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody so far for tuning in as we kick off our uh, 2025 Friends of Taunton Bay lecture series. I almost call it our summer lecture series, but I can't do that yet. So we call it the 25 Friends of Taunton Bay lecture series. My name's Jerry Monta. I'm the vice president of Friends of Taunton Bay, and Alice Noyes is here. She is the president, and she'll be joining us at the end. Hi, Alice. Um, Everybody's muted right now, but if you have any questions or comments, in at the bottom of the screen, see the chat button there. Just to go ahead and type in your question or your comment, and we'll get to you at the end of the presentation. But right now, it's time to talk PFAS. So our guest tonight, guest lecturer here to discuss the dangers and the prevalence of PFAS in Hancock County is the executive director of the Shaw Institute, Dr. Charles Rolsky. As you may or may not know, and some of this I did not know, so I'll read it. The Shaw Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit scientific research organization based in Blue Hill. Established nearly 35 years ago, the Institute's mission is to work to discover and expose environmental threats to the health and well-being of people, wildlife, and the environments we all share, and that includes PFAS. Their research on plastics, ocean pollution, marine mammal health, toxic chemicals, and climate change has informed public opinion and influenced public policy, impacting millions of people in Maine, the U.S., and worldwide. And now, Dr. Rolsky, you have the con.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for being here, and thanks for the opportunity to chat about this. I'd like to start off by saying I am nowhere near a chemist or someone that should be working on PFAS. I did my grads. I'm a biologist by training, but I did all my grad school work with engineers, so I have a little bit of an analytical focus. But PFAS is a very complicated subject, so I can do my best to answer questions based on what we've done so far. And with that, we can begin. So my background is pretty diverse. I started doing marine research with killer whales in the top left there. That was us with some killer whale fecal samples. They're endangered species that we had to use a dog to track down. That's a whole other topic I could talk about for many years. I did a postdoc in material science lab that really liked plastic. Well, a big focus of ours is plastic pollution, so I wanted to see both sides of that. And top right there, I don't look like the typical scientist, so I was asked to speak at the state capitol in Arizona, where I moved from, and they put extra emphasis on me taking it seriously, so I dressed as a shark. And then doing marine research in Arizona made me pretty unique, so my school liked to showcase my research. One of those focuses was a short documentary that won an Emmy, so that was cool. But I almost died while filming it, so that part's not so great. And then usually when I give talks, a lot of times people have this perception that scientists are nerdy. But at one conference, I got to meet the character that plays Aquaman in movies, and he's very muscular and cool. So that was a lot of fun. The Shaw Institute, as you heard, has been around for many years. We have a multitude of things that we work on depending on the season. A lot of these pictures are from the summer. So in the summer, we focus on a lot of coastal monitoring, looking at things like fecal bacteria and harmful phytoplankton. We usually take 3 interns while doing that. We're also an extension of the marine mammal response group in Maine, and we'll respond to seals or whales, or even we had a basking shark last year that we had to work on. Bottom left there is us doing some PFAS work. We also do a range of outreach activities, whether it's coastal cleanups, which we just did, or it's lectures that we have at the Institute. That's been a lot of fun for us. And then Charlie the shark likes to dress up as a shark. Actually, doesn't dress up, he is a shark. And he prefers to read books to kids about the ocean, or he'll take bones of whales that he ate to assisted living facilities and share it with the residents there. Bottom right's just one of my favorite pictures because that's a pretty heavy duty engineering equipment that we use to analyze plastics. And a big focus of ours is allowing kids to be able to use the instruments so they can kind of connect the science that way, which is pretty fun. But yeah, we do a lot of different things. A big focus of ours now is plastic pollution research, especially as it pertains to human health. Oftentimes, we kind of see the health of the planet and human health separate from one another. And a big push for us is at the Institute is to sort of connect the two and show that the environment impacts us. And what happens to the environment will happen to us. The PFAS that we're finding, the plastics that we're finding, when we look at autopsies of seals and we find things in their body, we know that they're top tier predators, just like we are. So it's important to make that connection. And on the coast of New England, we have harmful contaminants that have been reported, whether it's PFAS contamination, excessive nutrients that lead to eutrophication of harmful algal blooms, or harmful bacteria that closes beaches. These are all things that we study quite a bit in the summer, especially near areas where people are swimming or where aquaculture farms are located. So that's a big part of our summer work. Now, headlines like these are not uncommon, especially in Maine, when it comes to these things that we sample along the coast. For me, all I have to do is a basic search for PFAS in Maine, and you see a lot of good articles that come out, a lot of troubling articles that come out. But ultimately, what they reflect is a very complicated relationship we have with something. And oftentimes, I use PFAS and plastic interchangeably because they both of them were made for a reason. And unfortunately, their sort of end of life or how they end up in the environment, they weren't really considered at the consumption of the material or the chemicals. I also like to say that chemicals should not be a bad word. Water is a chemical. A herd of goats is a chemical, so it's good to differentiate between harmful chemicals and chemicals like water. So I don't want to have PFAS vilify all the chemicals in the world, but PFAS, again, it's this very dynamic relationship. It's something that these really big industrial companies took advantage of based on need. So there was a need for something to be invented that had the characteristics that PFAS has. And that's one of the reasons why it became so ubiquitous both in industry and unfortunately in the environment. So you could see in the top left there, we've got this industry footprint that leads to PFAS being used in Gore-Tex clothing, some takeout systems, and then you have PFAS that is used. It goes to a wastewater treatment plant, goes to a landfill, it's incinerated, land applied. You have AFFFs or certain types of foams that are used to repel fire. Once it's used, it survives that process, ends up in ecosystems beyond, and many of those ways allow it to connect to us and impact our health. It's a challenging situation, which is why it's so complicated. And unfortunately, in science, something being really complicated is okay. That's just the kind of state of the world. It's not always going to have a really easy resolution, but it's a very dynamic situation. And the reason it's so ubiquitous in nature is because it was so useful to us for a time. We're really good at making things and not testing out this sort of end of life. And with PFAS, it's able to survive fire, which means it can survive most things, and that's how it kind of got coined that forever chemical nickname. The reason why it was used is because of a multitude of properties, some being the water and oil repellent that they can provide. This is why it's used quite a bit in cooking ware. That's again segues into the non-stick thing as well. It's a slippery surface, food doesn't stick, and it can resist very, very, very high heats without breaking down. And I should have separated the last one as well. Chemical stability. They're very, very, very stable. The carbon and fluorine. I mean, it's just a really difficult thing to break apart for the reasons of why it's even so useful. Withstands fire, withstands water, damage. It's just heat, excessive heat. It's really, really good at those things. Why we shouldn't use it? Well, it's very persistent because we can't break it down. It's incredibly difficult to deal with it once it's used. And not only can it survive all of those things, but just like a lot of other harmful chemicals that we know well, it can accumulate over time. It can bioaccumulate and concentrate up the food chain and build up through repeated exposure, repeated usage, and PFAS has because of that been contaminating water sources, soil, air. Unfortunately, wastewater treatment plants are a wonderful thing. During my grad school years, I actually did a lot of research within them, and I would go, and the people that worked there said it would smell like money. It didn't smell like money, it smelled horrible. But what they meant was you're taking human waste and you're treating it and you're making it fertilizer that's very rich. It's a really good system to have because then the fertilizer will leave a wastewater treatment plant. It'll either be land applied on agricultural soils, it'll be sent to an incinerator, or it'll be sent to a landfill. Usually, things that are sent to incinerators or landfills stay there a long time. They're not really that helpful for the environment. But biosolids really are rich in a lot of different things that benefit, especially agriculture. So in Maine, we have a lot of agriculture, which is why this stuff was really used a lot. And unfortunately, when we use the PFAS, one of those routes, as you can see here, is going directly to a wastewater treatment plant, and then from there it's going to agricultural areas. So that's where it becomes a really big issue. That's why Maine had a really tough time when it came to PFAS, but it ended up having a really impressive response to the PFAS contamination, which was great. Now, when it comes to human health and also in organism health, there's a lot of things that it can affect. Immune system suppression, increased cholesterol levels, which can also pertain to liver damage, thyroid disease, reproductive problems, issues with certain kinds of cancer, hormone disruption. I mean, there's an overwhelming amount of things that are really worrisome about it. But the problem is, if I were to present this talk to a family of firefighters, they would probably say, I don't want my significant other, my family member to not be immune to fire. We need to have flame retardant properties of both the foam and the PPE that they wear. That's the challenge. So in science, it's really hard for us to say completely cut something out when it's protecting people like that from fire damage. Now, there's a lot of applications where it's unnecessary, where it could be replaced, but there is a lot of supply because there is a lot of demand. So that's one of the things, especially with PFAS and other contaminants, it has a really strong need. And so until we meet that need with something else, it's going to stick around a little while longer. Now, thankfully, the response to this has been so good that we've been able to phase it out of a lot of unnecessary applications. But it's complicated because in these scenarios, this is something that is useful. Now, if you do a basic search in Maine, again, this is what we started seeing. This was back in July of 2022. Back then, I had just taken a job at the Shaw Institute. I was fresh coming from Arizona State, and I'm not a PFAS researcher. It's a type of chemical that requires analytical equipment that's beyond my expertise. I don't want to learn LCMS. It's very, very complicated. I'm not a chemist. You kind of have to be a chemist to be able to understand the data and do it well. So for me, what I was trying to do at the Shaw Institute was find the middle ground. How can we be helpful to these groups in Maine that are reaching out to us, but not to the point that it's either going to bankrupt us or it's going to expose my fraudulent chemistry knowledge. So we ended up answering that call, and it went relatively well. So we started working with communities. We found some low-cost testing. I have collaborative partners that have really, really, really strong background in chemistry. And so we were able to sort of be that response to the communities that were impacted. And for us, it was actually pretty significant at the beginning. So in 2022, Governor Mills, they set up a PFAS fund with the direct intent to support farmers whose lands were contaminated with PFAS. And so the legislature approved $60 million, and it ended up, they put someone in charge named Beth Valentine, And she kind of asked around Maine, and she asked someone that said, well, the Shaw Institute's doing some stuff to help us. I ended up sort of giving a talk to this subcommittee under Beth and Governor Mills. And it's an impressive subcommittee. You've got members of the Senate, you've got commissioners, you've got deans of UMaine. What was really important for me to learn about this is that they actually included a decent amount of farmers. You can't just have this panel talking about how farmers are impacted without having farmers present. So there, where you can see at the bottom of that list, you've got some really impressive farmers that were also had a seat at the table and could share their perspective, that could share their concerns, the direction of their farms themselves. So after I gave a talk, I was lucky to have received a letter inviting me to join this really amazing group of people. And so I'd been a part of it since 2022. We're in the stage now where we're reviewing a lot of proposals that requested funding. It's really incredible. Not only is it aiding farmers, but it's also providing research funds so we can figure out how to extract PFAS from soil, what vegetables are the best to remove PFAS, like corn's really good at removing PFAS. We can figure out how it's ending up in cow milk and what the threats might be from that. There's a multitude of ways this is benefiting the state. So I'm really proud of the state of Maine for taking this lead. And it's really been across political lines. I ran into Susan Collins at the airport and had a really nice conversation with her about this work, and everybody can rally around this, which is a really wonderful thing. That's been sort of a breath of fresh air for me in Arizona. Or in Arizona, I had to convince people that we were facing a drought, and they still didn't believe me. In Maine, you can talk about the lobster, you can talk about farmers as being things that we need to salvage, but are impacted by our this sort of negative part of the human presence, and that's really just a nice thing to be around. So I ended up partnering with a group called Cyclopure. It's a company that's based out of Illinois, and they've created a really wonderful test that allows you to sort of look into 55 different PFAS chemicals to get a sense for the concentration in water samples. Now, if we go through the state of Maine and it's an EPA accredited lab, I'm going to pay 400 to 450, maybe 350 per test because the analysis is very expensive. Cyclopure uses the same exact method, give or take, the same instrument. And because they're not EPA accredited, we can get that test for $100, which is the cheapest possible, which is pretty incredible. So I got a handful of tests and I just started sampling around the area. I wanted to test the Penobscot River, I wanted to test around Blue Hill Bay, Ellsworth, and just to get a sense for how the tests work and then what kind of information we can extract from them. We ended up putting together kind of a rough outline, a rough map of what we're finding, what the concentrations are, what the chemicals are, what the areas are. This is something we're actually taking on a special GIS intern this summer that's going to help us elevate this and have it be publicly available. But it was really wonderful, and we could do it in conjunction with the Blue Hill Comprehensive Plan, which was being formed at the time. And one aspect of the comprehensive plan was to have access to clean water. So it was really important that we start working on this. And in 2021, Maine required the testing of all public water, and they set a limit of 20 parts per trillion for the sum of those six PFAS chemicals. And as a result of that, a lot of schools and public areas ended up finding certain levels of PFAS, and that was concerning. The Consolidated School was pretty high. Parker Ridge was up there. So this is where it started to kind of catch on that we're detecting something in the area. It's of concern to us. We have basic ways to test for it, and now because it's mandated, it's caught a lot more momentum than it had previous to that. So it was a really good step in the right direction. We ended up hearing from the town of Surrey, and my coworker at the time, Michelle Berger, she had a child that was at the Surrey school. So they reached out to us saying we'd like to explore how bad our PFAS is. And so we ended up getting those test kits, which you could see on the left. We still use them. And we ended up looking at surface water, municipal tap water, and private well water. There I am with the test. It's really easy. You basically fill that container up to the 250 milliliter mark. And that white thing at the bottom of the blue bit, that's a filter. So the filter will be able to collect PFAS chemicals in it. Meanwhile, the water passes through as soon as you fill it up. So you just let it sit, the water drains, you send that kit back, they collect it, and you get the results, a week to 2 weeks later, which is pretty amazing. So we started looking at three main areas. Now, the evidence that we received at the time around the school was mostly anecdotal. So people said to us that the soccer field had had soil deposited on the land that was biosolids based. So we wanted to start sort of a testing process on the field. And what we did is we collected multiple soil samples from multiple locations on the school I'm sorry, around the field, and we homogenized it. We blended it all up, and that gives us a pretty good indication of what's there. And it was a really well put together study. We also looked at the stream. So longer chain PFAS chemicals tend to be hydrophobic. They don't like water and they sequester around areas where contaminants typically sequester. Short chain PFAS chemicals are water soluble, so they'll travel in water really, really, really well. And that's what we wanted to kind of look at. Whenever we test a certain area, especially if it's soil based, we look for streams around that. It's a really good way for chemicals to move around, for harmful chemicals to move around that particular part. So we want to know if that is the reason that we might see higher levels, or if the just the field itself is why we see higher levels. We won't get too into the weeds with the data itself, but what you can see is the graphs on the left are the water samples, and then the graphs on the right are the soil samples. The colors represent certain PFAS chemicals, and then the amount is indicated by how high it is on the y-axis there. And what we see is that there is pretty high levels in this particular area. The field, it stays consistent with the thought that it could have been anecdotal, like truth that there was sludge deposited there at some point. Those are relatively high levels, especially with the water. That's also pretty concerning in that given area. But we're not physicians or toxicologists, and the current state of things right now is they typically will set a pretty high standard for what's acceptable and safe for people, but that's been lowered quite a bit. It can go down, it can go up. It's just based on data. And a lot of times people see that as a negative when it comes to science. Oh, you changed your mind, you flip-flopped. But physicians used to prescribe cocaine, and we don't do that anymore. So that's what happens when you get better data. It's actually kind of the adult thing to say that, well, we learned more and we're changing things. So right now we're still trying to figure out where to go. But the good thing is the soil samples, which is where kids play, even though it's on the higher end in terms of the comparisons with other studies that we've done, it's still pretty far below what's considered unsafe for kids to be around in a solid matrix. Now, if they're drinking the water that's heavily contaminated, that's different, but they've actually modified their source of water. Um, and so I think what Michelle said is that as a parent, she encouraged her kid to shower after playing soccer, but the exposure from drinking water is a much higher concern. So the fact that Surrey could be more proactive and change where they got their water from, or at least put a filter in, that made a big difference. So the conclusions from that study is that anecdotal evidence was supported, and one really interesting thing we found, I forget which chemical it was. So it was PFDS. Uh, PFDS is a PFAS chemical that is really not found in water. And so one of the things that we kind of came to an idea of with that is that they were cleaning the floor with something like a polish, and then they dumped that water outside, and the water got in the well somehow. I think that's what happened because that we've really never seen that PFAS chemical. And but again, that's a really good indication that this is something we should be educating people on. What you're using in the school is important. What you're dumping on the soil outside the school is important. So that was really interesting for us. And then the school ended up putting in a filtration system. We just still had there were other homes in the area we were concerned about, including community members was made this successful, and it can serve as a model for other communities that recently discovered PFAS that want to know more, might not necessarily have the funds to be able to pay for the state EPA accredited testing to be done. And that was really uplifting for us because we just wanted to be a good resource to not only the community, but other researchers. So as the town of PFAS was conducting or putting together its comprehensive plan, again, one of those aspects is they have to have access to clean water. So we approached the town and said, we're happy to put together a grant that would provide either low or no cost PFAS tests to residents of Blue Hill because that's a part of the comprehensive plan. It's something it's where our building is, so we're happy to do that. We wrote the grant, we submitted the grant, and the grant was successful. So what we ended up doing is we ended up getting 120 free kits from Cyclopure, and then we gave them out to the community, and it was really, really interesting. So we found PFAS in 43 well water samples, which is pretty comparable to national trends, which is so it's 36% of the wells that we tested, which is around 30% of what they're finding in nationwide uh, drinking water samples. Now the total PFAS concentrations ranged quite a bit from 1 to 83 parts per trillion. But the average was about 14. Again, the median is 14 as well. So we're comparing our data to national samples, and that's really helpful for us to sort of to understand the impact. Is this dangerous? Is this way higher than what we're seeing nationally? Is it lower? We're pretty much right in line with that. We detected 12 different PFAS compounds and at least one water or well water sample. And the most frequently detected ones were PFOA, and then you have PFH, XA, a couple other ones. I'm not surprised by this. PFOA is the most commonly used, especially when it came to people that were just getting household exposures of PFAS. And so one of the other aspects of this work is we looked at McCurd Brook, Millstream, and Peters Brook to see if we're finding it. Again, we always want to look at some water sources in the area. Those are easy links to things. It's not just from biosolids exposure, but it could also be from the water moving things. Now, it is a tough thing to look at. You could have data that changes night and day if you got rain the night before, if you get rain the day after. That really can influence the data. Sometimes it can make things more concentrated, sometimes it can really dilute things. But we were pretty confident in this study because we had a really wide range of Blue Hill, a lot of different areas. We sat down and worked with the town to figure out what are your tax codes, where can we figure out where to sample, and to say that we have an exhaustive list in the homes of Blue Hill, and it came together really well. I was really happy with the study. We saw a higher number in East Blue Hill, and I think it was East Blue. Is it East Blue Hill or South Blue Hill? Let me double check. I think it was South Blue Hill. But one of the other things we did is we put together a survey, which was really neat for me to see. So one of the questions that we asked about gave me an indication that the weekly packet and posting on social media was a good thing for us. We put a lot of money and time into that. So as an organization, it's nice to have that. And then one of the other questions we had, we asked if there were options for removing PFAS from drinking water, how likely are you to install a filter? And 100% of the people said either definitely likely, very likely, or somewhat likely. So it's a really cool combination of informing people about some sort of concern, doing some sort of grant or study that understands the concern, and then offering solutions. And because we put together that in a pretty, solid way, 100% of the people that participated in the survey said that they would do something about it. And that's exactly what you want as a scientist. It's research leading to meaningful change that improves the health of others. So it was a wonderful thing that we did from a research standpoint. It was great working with the town, great informing folks, and that leads us to Taunton Bay. So Taunton Bay, we were joking about it. Your data was boring. I didn't really see a lot of interesting stuff, but that's a really good thing. So we looked at 4 freshwater streams. We found 4 PFAS compounds, again, pretty consistent with some of the more popular types that are used. One thing we wanted to account for was rainfall. I think we did see enough of it that it could potentially lower some of the PFAS levels, but it's really tough to say. I think sampling at least different times of year, before and after a rain event, that's all pretty interesting to have. It's not necessarily sampling every year. It's sampling at different times with different conditions. That helps to really round it out so that in all of this sort of we have very variable environments here in Maine, as you could tell from with when winter was wearing off finally. So it's important to really capture all those different events from a scientific standpoint. Now, That takes us from land to sea. We know that a lot of what we're using ends up in the ocean, so it might be sequestered in that Surrey field. It might move through the stream and it might go right into the ocean there. And that's a connection that we've seen for many, many years. As we said before, this is something that we've seen when it comes to lots of different harmful chemicals that find their way into seawater that are very resilient to any type of degradation. In the ocean, you have the salinity itself, which can break things apart. You have the UV radiation of the sun, the same things that damage us when we're near the ocean. But PFAS chemicals are also known to travel starting at lower ends of the food chain and magnify as they get higher up in the food chain. And these are things that we like to talk about because, again, a lot of these marine mammals that we love and enjoy seeing, porpoises and seals, they eat the same fish that we do. And those same fish are at a higher level from a trophic perspective. So they probably have levels that are higher than plankton or in just regular seawater. We call marine mammals sentinels because they are indicators of environmental health. Gotta remember to take a breath. I'll pass out. Marine mammals out in this way, they don't have a lot of natural predators, so they do pretty well. That pose that the seal is doing is actually called the banana pose, which is an official scientific term. It's when they're very happy and well fed. That's a very round seal. So a lot of times there's so much competition for resources that inevitably some of them pass away, and that's just a part of nature. So we have and value that relationship with the marine mammal stranding network because we can utilize that seal. We can extract the organs and the skin and the blubber and the teeth, the whiskers. All of those things are going to give us that insight into the health of the environment. So whenever there's some sort of necropsy that's performed, which is an animal version of an autopsy, we're usually there at least once a summer, and we're there with bags to collect all of those important tidbits. Now, this was work that began at the Shaw Institute when it was called Mary in 2009. Susan Shaw led this study. She looked at liver samples from stranded harbor seals, 68 of them, 8 adult male, 10 adult female, 50 pups from 2000 to 2007. She looked at 10 of those long chain PFAS chemicals. And remember, those long chain PFAS chemicals are the ones that are hydrophobic. And what they ended up finding in the study from a pretty wide range, you can see that map up coast of Maine down to New York. What they found was that pups were more contaminated than adults. Now, that could be for various reasons, but we know that a lot of times when adults take in certain chemicals in their body, a lot of them can be passed through the milk, especially if there's any kind of fat resource on the mammal. If there's a lack of food at any point in the summer or the spring, they 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 use those fat storage, the fat storage areas of their body to sort of nourish themselves. And a lot of these chemicals are lipid soluble, meaning they like to sequester themselves in fat. So if there's a certain mother that's out being very active, has a new pup, use a lot of resources to give birth to the pup, it is quite possible that she'll tap into those fat resources to get energy, to generate milk, and a lot of those fat resources can have chemicals in them. So it was a really interesting study. It kind of showed that Susan was very ahead of the curve when it came to PFAS. So we looked at that in a little bit more detail. And in 1930, PFAS chemicals were first invented. Their use increased in the 40s. In 2001 is when it was first reported in wildlife around the world. That's PFAS. In 2003, they conducted a study that showed 98% of Americans had it in their bodies. 2000, 2006, that's when they started to phase some of it out. And then 2009, they began regulating it for drinking water. They added it to the Stockholm Convention. And then the 2020s and beyond, states really started to get more strict with what they were doing. In 2022, the EPA lowered the legal PFAS and PFOA limits. So it's kind of interesting how long it takes for this stuff to happen. I'm not going to pretend like I know why, but it does take a long time. It's a tough process once you get started, but either way, it led to this study, and we then documented that in 1991 we actually had our first harbor seal sample that was archived. So In 2024, we wanted to continue this research. We have a wonderful tissue repository in collaboration with groups like Allied Whale at COA. And there's a great grant that you can apply for called the Prescott Grant. So, what we wanted to do was basically say, what does PFAS look like over decades since 1991? And does it change? Is it different for certain sexes, for certain ages of seals? And really, are there any sort of positive changes on the PFAS levels that we find? Like, does banning it help? Those are all questions that we had. The paper on the left there is the one that Susan originally published in 2009. And then on the right is our Prescott grant that we submitted in 2024. Thankfully, it was really diverse with the team. So we can kind of acknowledge that PFAS has changed since the early 2000s when things were getting banned or removed, but we don't really know to what extent. We also said that DDT was banned, and yet we find it in certain ecosystems to this day. So again, it builds on our early Shaw Institute study with looked at seals between 2000 and 2007. But we have this tissue bank that we can access with that those samples dating back to 1991, and we can collaborate with the people that allow us to say, so what? Okay, you're finding it. Are there health implications as a result of that? So we're working with Dr. Sean Todd from Allied Whale, a marine mammal veterinarian, and we're working with the NYU Langone Metabolomics Lab to understand the impact of health. Step one is finding it. Step two is trying to identify if there's biomarkers that show that PFAS has a negative effect on these animals. So that was when we submitted it in October of 2023. Recommendations were made in 24, and we just sort of sat by. But eventually, it was fully funded, which was a really wonderful thing for us as a nonprofit because it allows us to grow, do research, not take a financial hit. It ended up being one of the largest competitive grant with three main goals. One is to analyze PFAS contamination for over a 30-year time frame to see if patterns change, especially after legislative bans. The second was to see if contamination varies by age, sex, or region. And then the third would be to see if it negatively impacts seal health. This has been frozen and very recently thawed. So I'm hoping that we can continue to do the work. It would support us hiring someone, multiple people. It would support us running samples. It would support every organization that's a part of the study. So it's just, it's a crazy time to be alive, but we're hoping that this stays thawed for us. Now, one of the questions that we get as researchers is what can I do? And what we recommend is what we do. Test your water and try to understand what the levels are. Try to reduce anything that says waterproof or stain resistant. That's a pretty easy thing to do for the most part. Replacing non-stick cookware with something that's not non-stick is also a really good idea. I could pay attention to fish consumption advisories. So if there's something saying that there have been higher levels in certain species of fish that we eat, that's good to pay attention to. For me, there's a lot of things we'd use on a regular basis that has chemicals that could be harmful in them. For example, everyone knows what PVC piping is. We all use it for the most part. VC stands for vinyl chloride, which is a carcinogen. It's cancer causing. It's within the chemistry of the plastic, but it's only going to be accessible if it's this word we like to use, volatilized. If there's an environment that allows the chemical to go from the plastic into either a liquid form or a gas form. That's not really going to happen with PVC piping. I mean, if you were running 300-degree liquids through the piping, then maybe it could be volatilized, it could melt. But for the most part, it's not. Another one is polystyrene, styrofoam. Styrene is a carcinogen, but again, it has to be volatilized. When you're using a nonstick pan and you're cooking at high temperatures with something you're going to eat, that is the perfect ecosystem for it to be removed from the pan. So it's something that we really recommend. Not always the biggest fan of recommending things that are expensive. I don't want to give suggestions to people when lower and middle income families can't afford to do it. But thankfully, we're at a time where there are healthier options that aren't super expensive. And a lot of people in Maine like to use cast iron, so that's a benefit for the state. The other thing is to understand that PFAS is found all throughout Maine. This is from the state DEP investigation looking at PFAS contamination across the state. So we know that because of the stability and the health effects, we should pay attention, keep monitoring, keep testing. And what's great is because Maine was hit hardest, they're now at the forefront of this issue. I mentioned before, I like working in a lab where people appreciate these things that were created, but now are cognizant of the fact that they have a harmful, detrimental effect on us or the planet. And in that lab, we had a reoccurring question, which was, do you ban the thing? Do you replace this thing? Do you recycle the thing? One of the researchers I worked with is now Dr. James Brown. I'm going to show pictures of a talk that he gave. I'm not going to explain them because he's way smarter than I am. He's a chemist, but I will summarize. Part of what James' talk focused on was understanding that PFAS is used for a reason. So is it possible to look at the chemistry of PFAS as a whole, identify why it's effective, and then also identify why it's harmful, and replace it with something that negates the harmful effects? That's the whole premise of the research that he did. He also did a lot of work with plastic, which was great. We can talk about that another time. It actually led to bioplastic from a company in Maine being used from Maine kelp, which is awesome. So we can talk about it another time. But his thing was trying to replace these foams with something that wasn't going to cause cancer and these long-term health effects. Now what he said was fluorinated surfactants like PFAS were critical in these foams, and he could indicate why they were so successful, and then what about foams was a strength of PFAS, but a limitation for other chemicals. And really, it was surface tension. It was the ability for it to retain those properties even during a fire. And I'm going to show you how complicated this gets. But he's basically creating these crazy equations to be able to understand why the formation of foams from PFAS are so successful and how you can recreate it using something else. And it was a really uplifting conversation and talk for him to give because this is addressing the need. It's used for a reason. And if we can recreate that, especially in the most high impact areas, which would for me would be like firefighting foams, if you can recreate it while completely eliminating what causes these really negative health effects, that's a big win for all of us, especially if you can match the price point and if you can match the properties. So there's a lot of research being done in this field to replace what's useful about PFAS chemicals without having the harmful effects. So it's almost a combination of those three things. You can ban certain really negative ones and certain ones that we're all exposed to. Finding a way to recycle or break down PFAS in a sustainable way is a huge thing right now that people are working on. But for me, replacing these things is probably going to be the most critical step in the right direction. And that's what he's working on. So I was really happy about that. Now, that's come to the end of my talk, but I couldn't end without plugging a couple things that the Shaw Institute is very happy about. We brought back, first of all, I want to thank Michelle. She's not a part of the Shaw Institute anymore, but she was critical in this research, my team and our interns. But we brought back a 200-gallon touch tank to Blue Hill, and we even have this dedicated touch tank room that we had painted by a friend of ours. This has been a pretty big movement for us in a really positive direction. It took a lot longer than we thought because the original tank that we got leaked. So the company that made it, who was actually they're from Biddeford, they made us a custom one, a really nice one, and we can see the steps on the side for shorter children. We had an opening not too long ago and expected maybe 50, 60 people. We had 300. And that's a really positive thing for not only for the town but for the state. A lot of the local businesses are really happy about this. A lot of the local schools are really happy about this. We already have school groups lined up. I probably made the stupid decision of making it free for the first year at least, but I understand that the world around us right now, it's tough on a lot of people. We got such a positive response to the touch tank that we're turning the whole downtown building into an environmental education center that we'll use to take our research and turn it into things that people can understand and be empowered by. So we're getting more aquariums. We have a two-color lobster that's 1 in 50 million that we're hosting there. He's half and half, so his name is Arnold Clommer. Pretty good for a scientist to come up with that. Uh, and then this is just a little subsection of some of the critters we have in there. We have blood stars, sea stars, we have anemones, we have lots of crabs and urchins, and we're open now. We're going to be open year round, and we'll see how it goes. I hope, by making it free, we'll get some donations. Really, we've invested a lot into it at this point, so whatever we get as a donation will go right to building more hands-on activities, more interactive displays, more aquariums, and we're going to be doing all sorts of lab tours and things like that. So we're really happy about this. And also, we have a new instrument that might be interesting to Taunton Bay folks. This is elevating our bacteria research, our fecal bacteria research. So instead of having to wait 24 hours for us to get data, we got this brand new instrument that's called a Tecta, and it allows us to not only look at one species of fecal bacteria that's been known to contaminate and shut down beaches around the US, but also to look at E. coli, which is an indicator that your well has been compromised. This is a really cool instrument because it gives data based on concentration. So if it's a heavily contaminated sample, I'll get a notification to my phone or email that says it's high enough that you should be doing something about it, which is really cool. This will be the first summer that we do it. The Shaw Institute's been doing fecal bacteria testing all around, as well as harmful algal bloom testing. You can see that map behind the instrument. Those are all the places that we've tested in the past. The Shaw Institute has never received a dime for this, even though Blue Hill really wants us to do it. So I hope that they change their mind for the first time in 30 years. But we just like to do it as a benefit to the folks that are visiting and swimming, people that are aquaculture farms in the area. We're an extension of the Department of Marine Resources in that way and very proud of it. But with that said, I'm happy to answer any questions. I appreciate everyone's time. We're right at that 45-minute mark. And yeah, thanks for your time and attention.
Well, we thank you, Dr. Rolsky. That was it's equal parts frightening and fascinating, and I think I speak for everybody when we say thank you for fighting the good fight and the state of Maine doing the right thing, by the way. So
Yeah.
it's really good to hear. And it also raises a bunch of questions. I have one about Taunton Bay, but I want to encourage anybody who has questions to if you go down to the bottom of your screen and you
We can also just talk if someone just wants to.
we can call on anybody who wants to ask a question. Just put your hand up. Go down to the bottom of the screen and you see the react button. If you push that button, then you'll see you can raise your hand and ask a question. And we've got some let's see some chats coming in, questions. But first of all, my question, Doctor, is about Taunton Bay. And, we got some really good results last year. We're basically in the clear as far as PFAS is concerned in Taunton Bay. But correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't mean we can rest on our laurels. We still have to keep testing, right?
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to put extra emphasis on the fact that it can change second to second. And sometimes we've tested after a rainstorm and it's diluted things and we think, oh, everything's fine. And then we'll test maybe a week later, it's the rain's gone away and the levels are much different. So it's important to keep testing and make sure that you're aware of all those different circumstances that can affect the levels that you're finding. And then especially as we grow as a state, we're still having a lot of people move here, even though it's tough to find housing. You can easily go on Amazon and buy something or go to the store that has PFAS in it. Just like with microbeads, I mean, those were phased out by President Obama. But if you go on Amazon, you buy the wrong thing, it's going to have microbeads in it. So it's still important to keep testing. There's still areas of Maine that we haven't tested. So we can't say definitively that it's not there. We only know what we tested up to this point. So you kind of set the standard there in terms of a good system to follow to ensure that you're aware of what the levels currently are.
Okay. Renata, excuse me, Renata, you've got a question?
Sure, I don't want to jump in front of anybody that has a chat question though, but
All right.
uh,
Nick Noyes says, can you advise us how to measure stream PFAS?
Yeah, actually, that picture of me doing some sampling that was in a Surrey stream, I would suggest that test kit. We don't get any special handout from CyclePure. They're really fair to us, and they give us a discount on tests. But I found that they're the best way to test things, especially in fresh water, and it's a really easy way to get results relatively quickly. If it was me, I would do a CyclePure test in that stream. We could do it. You could do it yourself. You could order it from their website. It's a really good method for detecting PFAS in any freshwater ecosystem.
And as a follow-up, if you do find it, and if you're looking for the source, how do you, what's your next step? Do you go upstream so far, or what's your strategy to find the source if you
It's
want to
it's
follow that?
really hard to find sources when there could be multiple. That's there. It could be a farm. It could be an industrial area. I mean, Maine has a lot of closed like paper mills. We still see residual PFAS coming from that. So yeah. Let's say we had a bunch of tests. I would want to be very measured in the sense that I want to have a hypothesis as to where it could come from. So we start with the map, and then the map will tell us like what the proximity of people, the proximity of farms. I would try to rank maybe what traditionally has a higher exposure in that area, and I would subsample up to that point and then a little bit after that point, and that should give a relatively good idea of what the PFAS, not only the concentration might be, but what the source might be. But it's really hard when there's multiple sources in a given ecosystem. You want to kind of have a multitude of tests, and that's why we want to do a combination of soil and water and Surrey. But the soil test is very little leeway. If it's anything that's not fresh water, we go through Maine laboratories. They're very kind to us, but you're still going to pay $350 per test. It's an expensive piece of equipment to use. I don't have an LCMS. I have a GCMS that I run for my human tissue studies, and we have to use gases like helium as part of that process, and helium is a finite resource. It's very expensive for us to buy, so it's an expensive test all in all.
Renata?
One of my questions was answered, which for the Hancock Community Garden, we've thought about testing our water. We don't drink it, but we put it all over the garden. And whether in the old days, maybe that land could have had sludge, but I don't think so. Jerry, you were the donator of that land, the
Hmm.
Hancock Community Garden. Yeah. So I don't know of any history that it had sludge on it at all.
Yeah, I don't know either. I,
I don't
I
think so.
remember playing baseball up there. That's about it. I don't know of any
Yeah.
farms or anything up there.
Right. So anyway, but I think you've answered that we can go on the website of that company and order a kit and do it. My other question, will this be on YouTube or this talk that you've recorded somewhere for us to be able
Yes, we'll put it on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. We'll put it on our website,
on
so
your
we can
website?
let you know when it's posted.
Okay, that'd be great. I know of people who would want to hear this. So thank you. Excellent talk. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention that we were a part of a documentary on PFAS contamination in Maine that I think we're going to showcase either in the summer or the fall. We'll have a couple showings, I think one in Bucksport, potentially one in Stonington, and we'll do like a panel conversation. We'll interview some of the folks involved in making the field, or I'm sorry, the film. And we wanted to get one of the producers. I don't know if you're aware of a guy named Matthew Modine. He's a pretty prominent actor that's done a lot for environmental causes. He's one of the producers. We tried to get him to come up, but he just signed on to a new project in Australia. He was going to drive up from New York, so I think instead we'll feature some of either the farmers that were in the documentary or some of the producers of the documentary, and that'll happen most likely in the fall of this year. We'll do a showing.
We got another question. This is from Sue Whitby, who happened to know just built a new house. And she says, how do I test my new garden soil to check for PFAS?
That's again, you're going to go through Maine laboratories. We're happy to help with CycloPure. We have tests on hand. We usually produce a report based on what we find to tell you what your data looks like. We could do the same thing with Maine laboratories. We can kind of be the middle person with them. The advantage with us is that at the very least, having a nonprofit involved means we avoid taxes, which might not be significant on a $100 test, but would be for a $350 test. So, yeah, if it was a soil sample, unfortunately, with our current instrumentation, we can't analyze soil, but Maine laboratories can, and it's just it wouldn't be the cheapest, but they're able to do it. There's
Deborah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say that there's push for us to get an instrument and to sort of help because there's a backlog of samples in Maine, but it's just expensive and nonprofits are not in a good place right now. So we just have to focus on operational funds and surviving. If we get a good donation, if we get support from the state, it's something where we could expand out. I would hire a chemist, I'd get an LCMS, and then we could do it. But for now, we're just collaborating with those folks.
Yeah, tough time to be a nonprofit, that's for sure. Deborah, I cannot pronounce your last name, says any main testing around landfills as a PFAS source?
That's been a big thing for us to focus on. Really, the position that we're in, it's based on need and it's based on demand. We haven't had a collaborative partner that has pushed for that, but I could easily say that if there was something along those lines, we would definitely take that project on. We did a little bit of testing in the Penobscot, which is connected to some of those places, but that's a critical source that we need to understand better. Just because we're not doing it doesn't mean others aren't. There's probably a lot of other folks that are doing PFAS testing around landfills. It's just not something that Shaw Institute is doing directly quite yet.
All
But some
right, if
interesting.
there are no more questions, Alice, do you want to add anything?
Well, thank you for coming, everyone. We did do this in 2024, 12 tests and or 14, I guess, two in each of the 7 streams. But that was where we came out negative on all of them, as compared to the year before when there was just one one PFAS recognized. So we'll keep doing that this year, and see what we find around Taunton Bay.
Yeah, that's
I
great
just want to
work.
mention that Alice just had cataract surgery, excuse me. Our president just had cataract surgery. Now, understand that if I had cataract surgery, I would take the next year off, not do anything. But she's here, and thank you for being here, Alice. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off, Doctor?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity. And if anyone wants to come check out our new touch tank, look at our website. We have hours posted. I just hired an Aquarist that's running it, and it's been a lot of fun for us. We're growing. I'm happy to give lab tours. We have 2 buildings now. We have 2 labs, and they're doing some pretty cool research. So if anyone wants to come by or have me give a talk or whatever, just reach out. We're happy to collaborate and are grateful for the opportunity to do so.
Terrific.
Thank you so
Dr.
much for
Charles
your talk.
Rolsky, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been tremendous. Wonderful.
Thank you all as well. And yeah, definitely if you want to head to our website and sign up for our newsletter and updates with any event that we do in the summer or throughout the year, including beach cleanups, which we do pretty often, definitely sign up and follow us. We're very eager to get more folks in the building.
Great, wonderful. And thank you all for being here. This is the first, as I mentioned, the first of our 2025 lecture series. To find out what's up next, go to friendsoftauntonbay.org, hit the calendar, and we'll hear from you then, and we'll see you then, hopefully. So that's it. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Jerry.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Take care.